as a rap artist that covers some scientific themes in my work, I want to do what most rap artists do, which is make music videos about your standard topics. You know, girls, bling, posturing, costly signaling theory is really the essence of it. And a couple of years ago, I made this video where I was being sort of studied and analyzed by a attractive female scientist who put me in a lab chair in a psychology experiment and was trying to get to the bottom of some of the Darwinian elements of sexual signaling theory as seen in hip-hop videos. But the lady in the video was really just a manifestation of my subconscious or my imagination or fantasy or something, because I just said, let's make a video that's got this in it. Wouldn't that be fun? But then a couple of years later, in 2012, I went to this event called Lucid NYC, where people were doing various talks about science. And I saw a talk by a neuroscientist named Dr. Heather Berlin. And Dr. Heather Berlin was talking about the dynamic unconscious and the neural basis of impulsive and compulsive behavior. And, you know, her talk was fascinating, but the primary thought in my mind was, oh my God, it's her. It looked like exactly like the girl from the video. So I couldn't help but chat her up afterwards. And this show tonight is going to begin with a happy ending, because I'm happy to say that we got married a year and a half ago. And, you know, it worked out. So she's going to be taking up the science side of this arts and science collaboration. So please welcome to the stage cognitive neuroscientist, current professor of psychiatry and neuroscience at the Mount Sinai Icahn School of Medicine, and current host of Science Goes to the Movies on CUNY TV, Dr. Heather Berlin.
Thanks, honey. That was sweet. So when I first met Baba, it was a little different. I actually saw him for the first time on stage, and he was rapping, and he was doing his thing, like, yo, yo, ain't no ho, or I don't know.
It's actually not one of my lyrics.
It's all the same to me, really. Sorry, honey. But, you know, what I found was really interesting is I was fascinated by what goes on in his brain when he's rapping, particularly when he's doing the freestyle rap, which is really complex and quite awe-inspiring. So I run a lab here in New York, and we run cognitive tests on people. We do some neuroimaging. And I actually invited him to my lab to see what was happening in his brain when he was rapping.
You can test me anytime, baby.
Yeah. So I gave him a series of tests. So we give people in my lab tests sort of like this one, which look at people's attentional allocation. So I thought maybe I'd try it out on you, if you guys all want to join in. So what I'd like you to do is just as quickly as you can, name the color that the word is printed in. Okay? Ready? Not very good. So what you'll notice is it got more difficult in the second column, and that's because there was a conflict. The name of the word was different than the color the word was printed in, and you had to suppress wanting to read the word in order to read the color. And so with these kinds of tasks where there's some conflicts in cognitive skills, or where you have to suppress information, it can give us some insight into the neural circuits that are involved with some of these cognitive processes. So I thought I'd kind of give you an example and run Baba through a couple of tests now while he's rapping, so we can get more insight into what's happening in his brain. But for this, I'm going to need a volunteer. So I need like a lab assistant. Somebody wants to volunteer. You can put it on your CV. Can't hear. How about that person right back there? Yeah. Come on up. Yeah. So what's your name? Kate. Kate. Everyone welcome Kate to the stage. I don't know how you get up. Okay, she'll come up around that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to run him through a series of tests. We're going to look at his motor skills. Here, hello. We're going to look at his motor skills. We're going to look at his cognitive skills as well. And for this, while he's rapping, I'm going to ask you to do three things. Okay, with this pointer, just that top button there, the laser pointer, I'm going to ask you to point to something in the room that everyone can see, maybe something on stage that he can see he's going to have to identify the color of that object, okay, while he's rapping. The next test is you're going to hold up a number of fingers on either one or both hands that he can see, and he's going to have to do a math equation with that number. And then finally, we're going to give him a memory task where I'm going to show you this array of items. You're going to choose 3 items, and he's going to have to remember those items and be tested on them later.
Got it.
Okay, but I'll talk you through it. Okay, you ready?
Guess so.
All right, drop the beat.
Yeah. All right. In the beginning, I was just a kid listening to Slick Rick, Maestro Fresh West, Jazzy Jeff, and the Fresh Prince. Rewrite the lyrics and recite them to my best friends. But I was just a copycat, and this was just a hobby that would probably pass after I'd exhausted all my sloppy raps and got the laughs I was after. Typical little bastard, privileged middle class, mischievous little rascal with a ticket to sit in the back row at a rap show. I listened to Fat Joe, Method Man, and B.I.G. and imagined living as a VIP. Though I didn't have a plan, just a fantasy, but I could still pass exams with ease and plant trees to get cash for books, tuition fees, and rap CDs. I had a chance to read classic Greek tragedies. I've always been addicted to words, so I just immersed myself in English literature. But I was immature, and these were fickle times. Between classes, I could listen to rhymes and find my lips whispering lines as if in the background. Then at 19, I wrote my first original rap down. Now I get lethargic, a reminisce in the darkness. Return to the days when I learned to spit marvelous and give props to those who started this hip-hop. You know I love being part of this. I still feel that prickle of initial excitement. I figured it's official, y'all. This is enlightenment. I picture myself ciphering with the likes of Big Pun, whipping punks into submission with the flip of the tongue. I did it for fun. I was ambitious and irreverent. I figured I was clever enough to get the better of any competitor, cause I was verbally first rate. My early verses were based on discursive wordplay. Hey! Big round of applause for Kate, please. Thank you.
Okay, that was good. That was good. So what did that tell us? It told us that he could very easily identify the color of objects in the room. So he's not really occupying much of his visual cortex when he's rapping. He could perfectly well do it with his eyes closed. Then we looked at his mathematical ability. That's sort of an area of the brain called the parietal cortex. And he could very easily do a math equation while rapping simultaneously, which tells us that that part of the brain isn't really that sort of utilized while he's rapping. It's not much cognitive demand. Then we gave him a memory task. And this one, he sometimes gets right. Sometimes he only gets 2 out of 3. It's a little bit harder. Did you find that? Or yeah.
When we go to 4 or 5, I definitely.
And he can't do it. Like I was like, let's move it up to 4, and he would always mess up. So we kept it at 3, so he wouldn't embarrass himself. But anyway, so this test is looking at working memory, which is a part of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And because he's utilizing his working memory, because he's doing a memorized rap, that it's increasing the cognitive demand. When you add another task, it makes it much harder. And that tells us that that part of the brain is being utilized when he's rapping. So we also know that obviously the language centers of his brain are being used when he's rapping. But one question I wanted to see was, are the same neural circuits involved in generating new words as are involved in reciting memorized words? So for this, we wanted to run a little test on him and to see if he can rap and write at the same time. So what I would like from you is just a suggestion for a film, a movie, a popular film. Yell it out. What? Beautiful Mind. Ooh, Beautiful Mind. That's a good one. Okay.
Okay, here we go.
Drop the beat. I like saying that. When does a neuroscientist get to say that?
Can we get that? Let's get that same beat restarted from the top.
Next semester, I convinced my teachers that hip-hop lyrics would be my thesis research. I thought I would be the first to study it in depth. Reality check, the library in depth. I've already had a long list of hip-hop scholarship steps that I followed in. David Foster Wallace and Triple O's and Brian Cox got acknowledgments and props. They started hip-hop history and they started to approach this culture realistically. And yeah, the next step for me on this MC trajectory was for me to freestyle obsessively on road trips. I was a motor mouth motorist. I made Lone Defoe sick on a solo tip, rocking Dr. Dre beats, explosive. I was making doors open. People started listening. Hip-hop for me was a form of discipline. Born again, I'm the Discman, studying flows. What do you know? I'm 20 years old, I hit the tracks, running my mouth like a runny nose, and started to do this like I was just busting flows. Now I get lethargic and reminisce in the darkness. Return to the days when I learned to spit marvelous, and give props to those who started this hip-hop. I love being part of this hip-hop. It's like I love being part of this hip-hop. Yeah, I love being part of this. Oh.
That bought him the first date. I was like, okay, that's impressive. That's pretty impressive. So what does that tell us? So even though he's utilizing a lot of his language centers of his brain when he's reciting a memorized rap, there's still sort of some room left over to be able to generate new words via text. But what if we take it up a notch? So what about freestyle rap? So with freestyle rap, this is a really complex cognitive task. It's not memorized. He has to generate it completely from scratch. It's really challenging because he has to engage all sorts of parts of his brain, but particularly his working memory. He has to make novel associations between ideas. The words have to rhyme. It has to make sense, and he has to stay on beat. So this is a really complex cognitive task. So you guys want to hear Baba do some freestyle? This is the part that sold me. Okay, ready? I'm going to say it again. Drop the beat.
Yeah, let me say this clearly. John Nash was a mathematical genius at game theory. That's why he ended up here in Genius Week. I mean, I can't even come close to his stuff. I can't even speak. Right now I'm just spitting a couple of dope rhymes, but maybe that'll get me a literary version of his Nobel Prize. Yes, can't you see the man was Harvard educator, or maybe it was Yale. That's a memory fail. But anyway, I'm going back to lots of different styles. I mean, he was so mathematical, I might break it in the clavicle. I step up with a freestyle, I bust the flow. I'm really persuasive like the actor Russell Crowe. Yes, indeed, I might just bust it. I do it kind of obviously, call it a homily. Yes, she was hot as Jennifer Connelly. That's what I thought when I saw my wife first. See, this is a freestyle, I don't write this verse. It's righteous verses that be coming off the top of my head. I'll be spitting a couple lyrics and maybe knocking them dead, but this is how I said it. Yes, you're gonna have to get it. I'm freestyling genius, but I'm not schizophrenic. I'ma have to kick this litmus. What is this? I'ma have to just maybe say some great rhymes. Honey, you want me to freestyle and write at the same time? Okay, yeah, I got married, yes indeed, which means daily I live with a person who loves to test me. Okay, I'ma rip this beat, I'ma switch this mic, so I'm gonna have to go to the other thing so that I can quickly write. Yeah, that's right, let me just open the word processor, make some noise if you think my wife is a hot dresser. That's right, that's how we spit it, she's the scientist, I got some stuff that I'll be spitting, it's the blindness. Okay, let me just open this up and write some words. It's absurd, where's the cursor? Oh, there it is, the third section of the screen. That's what I mean, it's obscene as I bust a little rap. Yes, it's up in your spleen, I mean your spleen. I can say the word spleen and write the word spleen, but that's not what I meant to do. Anyway, I'm just coming through with lots of lyrical. I can say the word lyrical every time I think the word lyrical. I want to write the word lyrical, but I gotta try to write a different word. Said the word and wrote the word. This is absurd. Okay, I thought I could nail this, but honey, I'm sorry, this test is too hard. I failed it.
Hey, get it back. Honey, press play. Yeah, thank you.
Just this right here.
You got it. Boom. So, fail, not good. No, so what does that tell us? So when you get to the level of freestyle, it's utilizing so much of his areas of the brain that have to do with language processing and creating new associations between ideas that there's simply nothing left over for him to be able to generate new words via text. But to really understand what's going on in his brain when he's rapping, we have to go a little bit further into the brain. So you have this 3-pound piece of matter. It's really amazing. It codes for everything you experience, all of your thoughts, your feelings, your sensations. And it's made up of the basic unit of the nervous system is the neuron. The brain contains about 100 billion neurons. Each one of those neurons has about 1,000 to 10,000 synapses or connections, which means that there are about 300 or 100 trillion connections in the human brain. There are more connections in the human brain than there are stars in the Milky Way. So it's this really amazing, complex system. And basically, it's an information processing system, the neural network. And it encodes, again, everything we experience from the moment we wake up until we go into a deep, dreamless sleep. And also everything that occurs outside of awareness. So it's a myth we only use 10% of our brain. We actually use all of our brain. We're just really not aware of a lot of what's happening behind the scenes. So what we can do is, in the lab, is we want to try to sort of get a glimpse of what's happening outside of awareness, because that's actually what's affecting most of our decisions, most of our behavior. We come up with these post hoc explanations about why we do things all the time. But I really want to understand what's being encoded in the brain in these unconscious processes. So we can give people stimuli in the lab like this. This is a subliminal message here. Like, raise your hand if you can see it. A couple of people. I know what you're thinking. Yeah. So you can see here in the negative space, it says S-E-X, see? And then there's the birds and the bees, and the flowers are kind of loving towards each other. And so now, once you see it, if I show you this in an hour, it'll pop right out at you. You can't unsee it, right? So, and it will go on to affect your behavior.
So this slide was actually in the first lecture that I saw Heather give when we first met that night. And I wasn't fully understanding what her point was, but I did feel strongly compelled to chat her up after the talk.
I actually thought if I put this in enough lectures, eventually I'd meet the right guy.
So much for free will.
Yeah, no such thing as free will. You should see what I whisper in his ear at night when he's sleeping. Like,
You want to share that?
do the dishes, you know? He does the dishes like every night, it's true. Anyway, moving on. So
I mean, my street cred.
So what we really want to understand is what's happening in the brain, as I said, outside of awareness, because what's happening out there in reality doesn't necessarily correlate with what you're perceiving in your mind's eye. So here's a nice example of that. Here you can look at squares A and B, right? And they look like they're different colors. You know, this is I should have used the dress example. Anyway, but yeah, I was just thinking this dress thing. But yeah, but I was using this way before the dress. But yeah, this looks like two different colors. And then what you can see is they're actually the same color. If you remove the shadow, it's called the shadow illusion. You remove the shadow, you draw a line between them, you see they're exactly the same. So our brain uses heuristics all the time. If we had to process exactly all the stimuli that was coming into our brain, it would be overwhelming because we have a limited capacity for conscious processing. And here's another example of where you can see this image in one way. You can see it as the old woman looking down. You see that's her mouth and her chin and her nose and her eye. Or you can see it as a young woman looking away. See, that's her eyelash and her nose and her chin and her ear. And they usually switch back and forth in your mind's eye. You never see them both at the same time, right? And so what's changing is not the image. The image is staying exactly the same. But what's changing is your perception. And that's what we try to track. We try to track what's called the neurocorrelates of consciousness or perception. Now, there are a lot of theories out there about what that might be, but one very well-supported theory is that it has to do with these coalitions of neurons coming together, and that's what comes into your conscious perception at any given moment. So if you think of it like a parliament, you have these different factions who always vote together and suppress the competing coalitions. And it's kind of like a Darwinian competition in your brain between these coalitions of neurons. They stay in power for a few seconds. They can stay there longer if you attend to something. And that's what's conscious. And then and when they die down, another population takes over. And that's the ebb and flow of your conscious thought. And people ask, okay, what brings these neurons together? And it's not like they're all firing at the same time. That would be like an epileptic seizure. But if you think of it like an orchestra playing, each neuron is like a player. They're not all warming up in the beginning out of sync, but they're also not all playing the same note. But when they're playing in a symphony in sync, that's what it's like when these neurons start firing together and form a coalition. So that's sort of thinking about what brings things into conscious awareness. But again, as I said, much of what's happening is happening outside of awareness. And there seems to be, roughly speaking, these two systems in your brain. You have these subcortical areas, these areas here in red, evolutionarily older, sometimes called the reptilian brain, that are sensitive to immediate reward, right? I want that piece of chocolate right now. And then it's sort of like your accelerating system. Freud would call it your id impulses. And then you have the more recently developed part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex here, which is like the brake system, thinking about the future consequences of your actions. You know, maybe I shouldn't have that piece of chocolate cake. I want to look good in that bikini. Freud would call it your superego. Humans have the largest percentage of prefrontal cortex compared to the rest of the brain than any other animal. So we do have a lot of ability to have impulse control. And when there's an imbalance between these two systems, that's where you see a lot of people who have impulse control disorders or certain types of addiction, or if there's brain damage to the prefrontal cortex, you no longer have a brake system. You know, so it's kind of like you have that impulse, like you want to check your phone all the time, like even when you're at dinner and your wife's telling you, you know, not to check your phone. You have to use your prefrontal cortex to kind of, you know, knock it into gear.
Working on it. You know?
Yeah. All right, slowly. It's all conditioning. Anyway, we won't get into that either. So, yeah. So one way we can start to access these unconscious processes. Well, there's a number of different ways. You know, psychotherapy. That's a lot of what things do in psychotherapy, where they're trying to bring these unconscious drives and desires to the forefront, so we can live maybe more in line with our long-term goals. The more, you know thyself. The more you can understand these impulses, the more you can either learn how to modulate them or live in accordance with them, and not maybe fight all your impulses all the time. Maybe that's not the best thing either. So there are ways to access it. Freud used to look at things like free association, dream interpretation. But one way that we can look at unconscious processes is via improvisation. And what's better than freestyle rap, right? So, you know, you can get to the inside of what's, you know, when your person has to spontaneously say things and there's no time to think about them and there's pressure there, you know, it allows this flow of information to come out from the unconscious. And so there's been this one small study, a neuroimaging study, looking at freestyle rappers. They put 12 rappers in the scanner. They had them either do a memorized rap or an improvised rap, and they looked at the difference in brain activation between these two conditions, and they found a really interesting pattern, particularly within the prefrontal cortex, that brake system. And I'll show you up more closely. What they found is that there's this part of the brain here in yellow called the medial prefrontal cortex that had increased activation when they were improvising compared to doing a memorized rap. And that has to do with the internal generation of new ideas. It's stimulus independent. It's coming from within. Okay, and then you had decreased activation in this part of the brain here called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Talked about that bit before, that has to do with working memory. So obviously they're not doing something that's memorized. It also has to do with your feeling, your sense of self. And so when that part's turned down, in a sense, you lose your sense of self. And and you lose that filter. It also filters your behavior to make sure it conforms with social norms. So your filtering system is turned down. So it kind of allows for the free flow of information from within to come uninhibited. And you can start making these more novel associations when you're in this state. And you know, like Eminem said, right? You got to lose yourself in the music. The moment you own it, you better never let it go. It's my little rap. Woo! Okay, so, but it's true when you're performing, when you're on stage, if you start becoming too self-aware, you lose that flow. Or a professional tennis player, you know, when they're in the midst of it, if they start thinking, how should I exactly hit that ball, at what angle, it will mess up their performance. So it allows the unconscious flow of information, which can be a really good thing because consciousness can get in the way. And another study was done where they actually looked at jazz improv, and they had these jazz pianists either play a memorized piece or an improvised piece. And again, when they were doing the improvised piece, they found a similar pattern of brain activation as they did in the rap study, in that they had increased activation of the medial prefrontal cortex and decreased activation of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. But again, this was a small study. It was just with 6 subjects. But it's starting to maybe get at the idea that there is this neural signature of when people are in this improv or creative state, what we call spontaneous creativity. And so this sort of piqued my interest, and we decided to do a larger study with a larger group of rappers. We also would have them be evaluated by other professional rappers and give them audience feedback, because part of the creative process, especially with improv performers, is you're getting feedback from the audience, and that's going on to affect your performance. It's not like you're just doing it in a little box. And also, it's not that he's just saying random words. They have to make sense. They have to maybe be funny. They have to strike a nerve. So although there's this flow of unconscious information, there's also some consciousness which is putting structure on it as well. And you go between these two states, internally focused and externally focused. So we're starting to look at that now. And of course, Bob is not just my husband, he's my lab rat. So we recently put him in my MRI machine.
You can scan me anytime.
Yeah. And you know, when we first put him in there, actually, we noticed two disturbing holes right there in his socks. I don't know if you can see that. I was like, honey, you couldn't on this one day wear the non-holy socks, but you can really see that.
I didn't know you had to take your shoes off to go in that thing.
I just had to point that out too. Yeah. So yeah, and we got some, this is just recently, we got these images. They haven't even been fully processed yet, but this is Baba's brain. And you can see he has a rather large prefrontal cortex. Nice. But there's another part of his brain right here. It's actually really small. In fact, you can barely see that. That's the part that has to do with listening. It's totally non-existent.
What'd you say, honey?
But in all seriousness, I thought maybe I would just talk you through some of the processes that are occurring in Baba's brain when he's rapping, and then maybe he could like freestyle interpret what I'm saying. We have a little back and forth, okay? Ready?
All right.
Okay. So first, information goes to the primary sensory cortex. Visual information goes to the visual cortex. Auditory information goes to the auditory cortex. And somatosensory information goes to the primary somatosensory cortex.
Looking for literal forces. I mean, this is something that's getting up in my visual cortex. Yes, I use that part of the senses when I rock this. My visual cortex right now is filled with hotness.
And then the information goes from the primary sensory cortices to a place called Wernicke's area that is involved with the interpretation of speech, understanding language.
I burn MCs and make my words sticky, using the part of my brain called Wernicke's. Can't you see? Yes, lyrics, I spit a barrage. I do it 3 times, call that a Wernicke menage.
And the information then goes from Wernicke's area to Broca's area, and that's involved in generating speech, like the creation of new words. If you get damage to that part of the brain, you get aphasia.
I'm so insane, I got damage to the center of my mind, call it my broken brain, yeah. Got about 1 million freestyles that I gave ya, and if I stumble over the beat, then you can call that aphasia.
Information goes from Broca's area to the primary motor cortex, and that controls every muscle in your body, your hands, your feet, your arms, your mouth, your lips, and your tongue.
Yeah, I got the dopest rhymes. Motor cortex is why my body is so motorized. Can't you even see? This is the way that I be twisting it. I got lots of motor cortices up in my fingertips.
And the motor cortex is divided into different regions. So parts of the body that have more fine motor movement have larger representations on the cortex. So you can see you have a really large representation for the mouth and the tongue.
Yeah, I'm the MC, I use the cortex to stimulate all the sensory. I spit a couple lyrics right now just for fun, but you know the strongest one in my whole body is my tongue. She knows.
That's true.
Focus on the science, honey.
Okay, so then the whole time he has to keep on rhythm, and there's a part of the brain called the little brain, the cerebellum, and that has to do with keeping rhythm, like staying on beat.
There's nothing you could tell me. I got lots of different rhythms. I can rock your cerebellum. Rockefellers ain't be rocking better than me. Acapellas, what I'm spitting when I'm not on top of beats like helicopter propellers. Whatever it is, clever with this. When I come with a couple of twisted lyrics, I'm scientific. Sometimes I freestyle to show that I am gifted, but when it comes to brain stuff, better listen to this chick.
Awesome. Thank you, honey.
Thank you. Give it up for Heather.
So the other interesting thing is that it's not only during improvisation where you get that pattern of activation, but there are other brain states where you see a similar pattern of activation. So for example, during hypnosis, during daydreaming, during certain types of meditation, and during REM sleep. You see a similar pattern of activation where the part of your sense of self and sense of time and place is sort of, that part of the brain is turned down, but it allows for the generation of these novel associations. You know, like in dream states, it doesn't necessarily have to make sense, and that leads to certain types of creativity. And also in this state, people lose their sense of focus, again, their sense of time and self and place. In this flow state that people describe, they describe really positive emotions associated with it. They strive to achieve that state. And we're now really interested in, well, at least I am, is moving my research in a direction to look across different artistic disciplines and see if there's perhaps a neural signature. So do you see a same pattern of activation when people are in the creative process of painting, or during theater improv, or comedy improv, or even dance improv? And if we can identify this sort of neural signature of creativity or spontaneous creativity, then perhaps we can figure out how to modulate it, how to enhance it in people. So that's sort of exciting new place where I'd like to see my research is moving in that direction. But what I'd like to do now is actually bring back on Scott Barry Kaufman, and he's going to go a little bit deeper into talking about the creative process itself. So yeah, Scott?
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to step out this time. I'm going to step out. So I've had the great pleasure of knowing Baba for a couple of years, and he was kind enough to have me give him a complete battery of tests. A couple of years, he didn't know I was going to talk about this, so I hope this is okay. But so I gave him a complete battery of tests, and what I found is some very interesting nuanced findings that dovetails with the literature about what creative people are like. So first of all, I found that he scored up the kazoo in narcissism. But what's interesting, and which we do see in this creativity literature, is not all aspects. So narcissism is actually multidimensional. So he scored high in the adaptive aspects of narcissism, and he didn't. So things like confidence, things like leadership, but the more maladaptive aspects, like entitlement, he didn't score as high on. So there are certain aspects that are conducive to creativity, even though we put these labels on these things like narcissism. As well, he scored high in compassion. Right? And so a lot of people are like, how do you reconcile compassion with narcissism? And you keep looking, and I looked at his profile, and you keep looking at the profile of creative people, and you see paradoxes. So actually, do we get a clicker? So one of the really common things about creative people is they seem to be able to harness lots of seemingly, God bless you. I think that was a God bless you. Yeah, okay. You see lots of seemingly paradoxical traits all in one package. And it seems like that allows creative people who have to go through lots of different processes to flexibly, so the key is flexible, being flexible there, right? So if you're always confident, right, that's not going to be good because you'll fall on your ass at some point, right? But if you're always like, you know, shy and whatever the word of the opposite of confident is, unconfident, I don't know if that's a word, I'm going to go with it. You probably not going to be too good, okay? So the old model of creativity, okay. The old model of creativity, I went too fast, was this four-stage model. This is from like the 1920s, okay, and this was by a psychologist, by an individual called, a scientist called Wallace. And he argued, he says, I think that creativity goes through these four stages. We have this preparation stage where we gather as much information as possible, and then we have this incubation stage where we let it sit, and you know we smoke pot or whatever we want to do, you know, while it's all, you know, going in there. I don't know. Did they have pot in the 20s? I don't know. Anyway, and then we have this, and then once, or not smoke pot, but you know, like take a walk or you know, in the bathtub, and then you have this amazing eureka moment of illumination. We're like, that's the answer, right? And then that inspires you to go and write it all down. But I mean, if only it were that easy, right? So I think most of us can more relate to this model of the creative process, where we start to work, right, and then we tell everyone to, you know, F off, you know, like, and then we get to the point where we realize we're like 2 hours away from the deadline, and we panic, you know, and then you know, while we're listening to like 80s music and we're crying, you know, with a glass of wine, you know, knowing that we have like watching the countdown to the editor, to send to the editor, and then you have the deadline, and then the process starts all over again. I think the creative process, what we've learned about the creative process is that creative geniuses go more along this kind of process than the earlier one. There are hints of the earlier stage, but really creativity is messy. The creative person is messy. It's a great myth that creative geniuses are consistent, that they're always consistently geniuses. Now, it may appear that way, and a lot of creative geniuses are good marketers, right? So, and they're high in narcissism, right? So in some facets that can be adaptive, that can allow them to appear as though they didn't have to work hard at all. But when you actually look at the creative process, you find lots of really interesting aspects of the process that resemble what everyday people go through in their normal lives when they're trying to be creative as well. So there's this theory that is supposed to be a better explanation. The data does fit the data better about how creativity works. It's called the BBSR theory of creativity. This is a picture of Dean Simonton, who's a legend in creativity research, and he is the modern-day proponent of this theory. So according to the BBSR theory, we have the creative process itself resembles the evolutionary process. So first we have this blind variation stage where we're just generating lots and lots of ideas. Not completely blind, right? But pretty darn blind. We don't know how it's going to be received, right? We don't know. Creators need to take some risks, okay? So if you don't take any risks and you're completely unsighted, or you're completely sighted, right? So I completely see the solution, that's probably not going to be a creative solution. So creators need to go through the stage of blind variation, and then eventually selective retention, where you take the best ideas that you like and you want to pursue further, and then you flesh it out. So this is the blind variation stage is encapsulated in this Michael Scott Wayne Gretzky quote. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Yes, so Wayne Gretzky originally said that. And I think Michael Scott maybe took credit for that quote in one of the episodes of The Office or something. So it is important to take these sort of risks. Thomas Edison said, "I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." And that is reflected in his patent output. Most of his stuff was really crap. Okay, so most of his stuff he actually had in his generation some of the worst things in his generation. He just happened to have one or two things that happen to be the best of all time. So it's okay to have lots and lots of horrible stuff if you can eventually get it together. This is a quote. A lot of writers, I think, can really relate to this. Do we have any writers in the room? Hopefully you can relate to this. It's like driving a car at night. You never see further than your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. You see this in, and so analysis of creative genius after creative genius, you see this is really how the process works. So if you do Dean Simonton has done a really good analysis of Picasso's Guernica. Did anyone recognize that? And what you find is that if creativity was this very linear four-stage process, right? You would expect to see this kind of curve. You would expect to see there be some sort of upward progress of the creative process, so that when you look at earlier drafts, you would see clearly the later drafts are rated much better. So it's like as though he has some sort of sightedness. But what you actually find when you do the analysis of it is it's more like this. Okay, so this is actually what we look like here. So it is almost looking like he's operating blind. Well, he's not blind, but he's experimenting. He's going through a lot of trial and error. He's taking a lot of steps back and then surging ahead. And you do see this over and over again when you look at different creators. How many of you have heard this play by Shakespeare? I'd be shocked if anyone has. Oh, okay. The writers in the room, yeah? So here's an analysis of the popularity, okay, of Shakespeare's plays. This one is rated 3% popularity. Do we have a highlighter here? I don't know. Oh, look at that. Okay, so do you see that? 3%. Okay. Hamlet is 100%. So that's considered his greatest masterpiece. But if you look here, I mean, 1603, he created Hamlet, and then he somehow managed to create this just 2 years later, okay? So it's not like he's showing upward progress of his, creative ability, okay? Clearly, he's, could do an absolute masterpiece, and then he somehow managed to be able to do, a complete clunker, okay? And, Pericles is also a clunker. No offense if we have any Pericles fans in this room. But it's just not considered very popular in the annals of creative history. So all this research across looking at lots of different fields and has come up with a rule. So Dean Simonton's rule is the average publication of any particular scientist does not have any statistically different chance of having more of an impact than any other scientist's average publication. This was crazy, when he came up with this theory in 1977, you're almost like, what? Are you kidding me? But this is technically true. So what it means is that if you want to be a creative genius, you need to get through enough average pieces of work so that you can eventually get to the good stuff. Okay? So this is my theory of creativity. The secret of creative genius is create, 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 create. Okay, you get it. Okay. So I think there's some deep implications here, and one implication I think is with creative genius or madness. So there's this great myth that genius and madness are necessarily linked. There are some nuanced, interesting associations between the two, and I'll tell you some of this nuanced stuff, which recently came out in a book that was edited. So if you look at the idea generation stage, that blind variation stage, we say like, how many uses are there for a brick, or how about this one? This is one we use in our laboratory. What would happen if people could become invisible at will? If I had a lot of time, I would get lots and lots of responses. But let's get one. Let's get one. Who wants to think of a really creative thing? If no one raises their hand, I'm going to call in Spencer Greenberg. Okay. What is it? Your in-laws. What does that mean? Well, I don't know what that means. What would happen if you could become invisible at will? You would, what with your in-laws? You would steal from your in-laws? You would what? So you would like fuck with people. You'd like mess with people. See, the thing that I find interesting, and I've given this talk quite a few times, is everyone's responses seem to be immoral. And I don't know what that means about the state of humanity. But people are like, I would steal all the TVs, or whatever. And but this is what's interesting. So these are responses from. But I mean, those are good responses, by the way. Morality aside, like those are fine. But they would score probably high. So what you do is you get a lot of raters rating the creativity of these things. And here are some responses. These are considered some really original responses. Very shy people would have sex while being invisible. You could see only beautiful people on the beaches. Cops would wear infrared goggles. Paparazzi would be more effective. It would be harder to play hide and seek. I really like this one now that I've got on OkCupid lately. You could escape a bad date. Okay. So what you find when you put people in the fMRI scanner and you have them try to think imaginatively about these sorts of things, you do see activation in this brain network that Heather was talking about called the default mode network, or I like to call it the imagination brain network. It really is this brain network associated with internal cognition, looking inward. And what you find is there's one particular aspect of this brain network, because it's a network, so it's like they're all like team players, and they all like communicate together. There's one particular aspect of this network you find that's active both in the really highly creative people as well as those with schizophrenia. Okay? So there's actually a similarity here. In particular, there's a watered-down version of schizophrenia called schizotypy, which is like a personality trait, and every single one of you in this room could take a schizotypal personality questionnaire and you'd be somewhere on the curve, right? It's a dimensional construct. Okay? And what people who are extremely high in schizotypy, they might be prone to psychosis. But if you're just like high, but not like really high, you just have an active imagination. You have a lot of fantasy. You fantasize a lot. Okay? And what they find is that this particular area of the brain, this is my favorite area of the brain. It's my favorite. It's called the precuneus. It's the area of the default mode network or the imagination brain network that is most active when we're just at rest, when we're just like chilling. No one is forcing us to pay attention to them. No one is forcing our attention. You're not in school. You're not taking a lecture. You're daydreaming, right? But you're also just sitting there at rest, and you're getting really in touch with your inner memories, your deeply personal memories, your fantasies, everything like that. What you find is that it's this indistinguishable between those with schizotypy and the really creative responses. So there does seem to be a really strong commonality there. But of course there's a difference, right? So at the most extreme level, right, it's not, if you have schizophrenia, if you actually have psychotic delusions, what's really going on there is you're having trouble distinguishing between fantasy and reality, right? So you are a walking imagination network with really hard, like Heather was talking about the working memory, and the default and the executive attention network, and you find that is hard for people with schizophrenia. So you do need both, and at some point you do need to bring back online some of those more critical thinking facilities, the idea generation. This is one of my favorite quotes by Edgar Allan Poe. Any Poe fans here? Great. So in this quote, I think he got it quite right, showing that creativity, this precuneus area, which is active all the time in people who are schizotypy, and I think what's going on is it allows us to dream all day during the day. That's what it's allowing us to do while we're processing the world. So men have called me mad, but the question is not yet settled whether madness is or is not the loftiest intelligence, whether much that is glorious, whether all that is profound does not spring from disease of thought, from moods of mind exalted at the expense of the general intellect. Those who dream by day, what he's saying, those who keep their precuneus active, are cognizant of many things which escape those who dream only by night. In their gray visions, they obtain glimpses of eternity and thrill in waking to find that they have been upon the verge of the great secret. I would have loved to have stuck him in an fMRI scanner. I bet we'd find his precuneus is like up the kazoo, you know, active. So like I was saying, you know, it is important, though, to not just be a walking precuneus. It is important also to bring on some of those critical thinking facilities, this idea generation, picking the best ideas. The creative geniuses did go through a lot of blind variation, but they also did engage in selective retention, because what you get when you don't engage in any selective retention is that. Okay? So it is important to have both. I wanted to say that take it in. Some of you may be resonating with this. You dress your dog like that. Rex Young was supposed to be on this program today. Unfortunately, he's stuck in Kansas because of the storm. So he is. I just wanted to give a shout out to Rex because he's really. We're all really excited to have him to be part of this program. He's a legend in the field of neuroscience. He's alive. He's good. You know, I know the way I'm saying this is like, but he's alive. He's well. He's probably watching this streaming from his hotel room right now in Kansas. But I did want to give that shout out. So he was next going to talk about the evolution of creativity, but instead we are improvising here, and we're going to get Baba back on to do rap about the evolution of creativity.
So if we have circuits in our brains for creativity, that obviously raises the evolutionary question: how were they adaptive in the first place? Why were they selected for? So I want to outline one of the key theories in evolutionary biology of why humans have creativity, and do so by looking at my own use of it and how we all use it. So you got to go back and think that Charles Darwin saw natural selection, not sexual selection, but natural selection as the most serious cause of evolution. But what was going on with peacocks and bird songs? They follow mysterious laws. But then Darwin had a curious thought. It was an idea that probably occurred to him while he was trying to explain his theory to a young Victorian blonde whose face displayed a mixture of desire and feverish awe, the immediate cause of which Darwin clearly saw. Yeah. So he said, "My dear, descent with modification comes from the struggle for survival and for reproduction. Hence, the reason for some structures must indeed be seduction." What's up? In fact, Darwin's brain was probably one such structure, designed for seduction. Just as peacocks' tails show off the genes of the top males, and likewise the songs of nightingales and the fighting skills of elephant seals and minnows with colorful scales. See, those are all traits that sexual selection has demonstrably shaped through the female preference to get with the fittest mates. But in the case of human brains, that selective pressure had to go both ways. Had to go male to female, also go female to male. But pretty much anything in nature that is just for display and isn't meant to evade or chase predators away must have been selected for in a sexual way. That's the general rule. Anything that's just for display and has no survival value must have been selected for in a sexual way. But wait, wouldn't that suggest that this is just such a display? What I'm doing right now on stage seemed to work on Heather, right? But look, what's to explain? Look, there's probably a little bit more to explain. I mean, when I say that something ornate, like creative language, originally evolved as some kind of seductive display, I am not arguing that people only use language just to get laid. Darwin leaves Freud in the dustbin, okay? Something that you can use for one purpose in the past could be adapted for a different purpose today. Like, for instance, I could use a urine stream to put out a fire, but that doesn't mean the penis evolved as a bush firefighter. See, this is a theory of language function, a theory of where language comes from. What we use it for now, that's a separate discussion. So which was it? Was complex human language originally a mechanism of survival or of reproduction? I mean, it has to have been one of them, right? I'm talking complex language now, not simple language like, ooh, look, snake, don't step. Complex language. How would complex language possibly help an individual to survive in the Stone Age? Can you talk a parasite out of infecting? Can you talk a predator out of attacking? Can you talk a potential mate into consenting? potentially, hence presenting the grand unified theory of rhyme. The mating mind uses lyrical signs combined with wit and wordplay and conversation and humor and different narrative styles to appraise the fitness of mates, both for the purpose of marriage ties and also for mates of the more temporary kind. See, these are the humble roots of the literary sublime. Human beings are all just Shakespearean primates verbalizing our cherry behinds. But how could we possibly test this theory of mine? To test it, we would need experimental holding zoos filled with human subjects. We could even use this room, and with an overhead view, we'd have to observe which breeding pairs reproduce and how often they use their verbal ornaments to seduce. We could even separate everybody into control groups so we can find out whether it's the male or the female vocals that are on average more prone to be used in the stimulation of hormones, although it's true that that sort of experiment on populations of humans isn't normally approved outside of nightclubs. If only there existed in a state of nature some cultural group that's preoccupied with making paper and parading half-naked women shaking their moneymakers in front of competitive males, displaying mating behavior while trading their creativity for sexual favors. Can anyone think of an example of such a group? Or a few dozen examples? If such a group existed, I predict it would be a major player in the entertainment industry and would be in major danger of being overwhelmed by angry player haters. But I may have to save some of my research for later. In fact, when it comes to research, I should probably just always defer to Heather as my primary investigator. Thank you. So I'm going to flip this back on her now because Heather treats me like a lab rat a lot and experiments on me, but it kind of goes both ways. I've been teaching her how to rap as well. So how would you guys like to hear an Oxford-educated PhD neuroscientist kick a rhyme? All right, honey. Here we go.
I'm like so nervous for this. This is only for you, honey.
That's right.
Okay. Oh. We have to kick. Okay. Remember, I'm just a neuroscientist. I'm not a rapper, but this is my attempt to please my husband. Okay,
None of this is just in anything. You wake up the circuits and they all come alive.
Okay, ready? The only rap I know is Beastie Boys. Is this to the Beastie Boys? Okay. Kick me in. Ready? Yeah.
Paul Revere, right?
Okay, ready? Now, here's a little story I got to tell about a prefrontal cortex that started to swell. It started way back in history on the hominid branch of a
Family tree.
Had a little homo habilis tribe, making some tools and tanning some hides, wandering across the land, kicking up sand, looking for mates because they're in demand. One lonely Lucy I be, all by myself without nobody. The sun is beating down on my sagittal crest. Stone Age man won't give me no rest. I'm a fly girl, I can handle y'all. Looking for a guy, no Neanderthal. Cortex swelling with executive function. Impulses can't tell me nothing. Guys come and go, guys come and go. I choose guys with my frontal lobe. I want a brainy baby, I'm a rational actor, but still somehow I ended up with a rapper? What?
Make some noise for Heather Berlin.
So
I think we'd like to invite Scott back out here, and
I think we've budgeted some time for a question period with the audience. So, or actually, the questions have been submitted, haven't they? They've been previously submitted.
Here, should we grab them? Okay. Should I read the cards? You want to have some?
Yeah, let's both get a couple.
Okay. Well, they might go for different people. I don't know. Okay.
Baba has an increased understanding of what's going on in your brain. Has that changed the way you approach your art?
I mean, I think it's confirmed things that I had a hunch about like I need to get in the flow state and turn off the analyzer sometimes to produce things. Actually, you know, some of the stuff from your talk made me feel a lot more comfortable with my work process.
Good.
In general.
I'm glad I could do that for you.
the last minute crisis stuff.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm also just you know, I'm curious to see what's popping in there. But I'm not sure if there's like a directly applicable thing that's happened yet that makes me better at anything. Practice is still supremely important.
Definitely.
You want to read yours?
Mine says, how does Eminem's brain differ from the average person's brain? And hopefully we get a chance to scan it and find out. But You want to take that one?
Yeah, he probably has like more advanced connections in terms of his language areas. And, you know, over time when you practice, just like a musician, right, they have, for example, like a pianist has more connections in the part of his motor cortex that has to do with finger movements. And so over time, when you practice something, a cognitive skill or a motor skill, you know, you develop new connections in the brain. So I'm sure his brain would look slightly different.
I would predict that his dorsolateral prefrontal cortex might be smaller than the average. Now that's the area of the brain associated with curse words, with a quantity of curse words. So I don't know, perhaps, you know, or the filter, we should say the filter. Probably use a lower filter, so.
But I think, yeah, I mean, size isn't really what matters as much as the connectivity, right? So I think that, yeah, it's all about how you're wired up. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. At age 65, are things in particular to learn a foreign language faster? What does that mean? Can you interpret that for me?
Are there things?
Oh, sorry. Are there things in particular
that will help you learn it faster?
Oh, okay. Okay, so there are critical periods of development for language development. I think it's between the ages, I think it's around like 3 or so, where if you're exposed to a foreign language at that age, then you'll learn it without an accent. And if you're past the critical period of development, it's actually really difficult, not only difficult to learn a foreign language, but also hard to ever speak it without having an accent. So it's possible to learn new things at any age. It just becomes a little bit more difficult because I kind of always think of the brain as like a piece of clay, and it's like really soft and subtle in the beginning, and then over time it kind of solidifies and it gets harder and harder to modify, but there's synaptic plasticity across the lifespan. And we even have stem cells which can migrate out at any age that are in like the hippocampus that can form new connections at any point. But I think it's like anything else, like use it. If you're older and you want to keep your brain active and healthy, try to learn a new skill, always try to do something novel, and that keeps it healthy, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think, can we actually open it up, like, and just like be brave here and just open it up on the spot?
I'm happy to
a
do
couple.
that.
Were you guys okay with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions that you didn't write down on the notes? Yeah, sir.
I read a little bit about mirror neurons, and without saying this is exactly it, empathy or imitation, but that's the direction of the mirror neuron, which I associated as being significant relationship to conformity.
Oh.
And
That's interesting.
the narcissistic thing, whatever.
Who, me?
Is interesting because it's we have the opposite correlation. Somebody who would be low in mirror neuron activation might be more narcissistic, less empathetic.
There's something that's interesting. There's a difference between compassion and empathy, and they actually rely on distinct systems in the brain. So a lot of compassion, like higher level compassion, is not all about immediately feeling. So if someone is in pain, right? Empathy, you feel their pain. But actually, a lot of people who have high compassion and loving kindness meditation, a lot of individuals have, they actually feel love for the person. So it's not necessarily like they feel what they're thinking, but they have a cognitive understanding. And I think that they were talking about today, the default network of the brain, that's been linked to compassion in a lot of ways, because this is more of this higher level understanding aspect. I think, I can't talk about the association with narcissism too much, but I think it's important to distinguish between automatic gut feeling what someone else is feeling and having a more higher level representation and understanding of what someone's going through. They're not necessarily the same thing. Do you want to add to that as well?
No, I think that's good. Yeah.
Cool.
Over there. Hey.
At the opening of the program, there was an allusion to the left brain versus the right brain.
Yeah.
Could you address the myth and reality of the conventional knowledge, right and wrong, about left versus right, logic versus emotion, the good Gazzaniga stuff, and the popular myths and all of that? And to Baba's perspective, to what extent does Baba engage in so-called left versus so-called right as he is composing and as he is performing?
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, you've written about this a bit, but I think, yeah.
It's my favorite topic, really.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other topic that excites me more. But yeah.
I mean, it's a myth as far as I can and like even like language processing. Language is processed by both sides of the brain. Just the left side might have more involvement, but not always. I mean, people who are ambidextrous, or even people who are left-handed, tend to have less laterality. Can't say in the brain. So language is even more evenly distributed, and music as well. This left brain, and the Gazzaniga work. Gazzaniga basically, you had patients who were being treated for epilepsy where they split the corpus callosum, which is the main connection between the two hemispheres, and then he presented information to one hemisphere versus the other, and the linguistic hemisphere, the left brain, could verbalize what it was experiencing, and the right brain couldn't as much. But I still don't think that that's evidence enough for there being this dichotomy where like the left brain is logical and linguistic and the right brain is all artistic. And
yeah, I really think the wave of the future is what we're talking about today. That sounded a little narcissistic, didn't it? But we're talking about large-scale brain networks. That's our emphasis today in this talk, and I really do think that is where the whole field is moving. Understanding that there are a lot of team players in both the left and right hemisphere, and what matters is what we're processing. You know, what's the stimulus? Is it verbal, nonverbal, et cetera? And what stage of the process are we? We're being critical, we're being open, you know, all these processes. So I think that's really the way of the future.
Want to take one more?
Ooh, should we go like all the way in the back, you think?
Yeah, or a woman. I want a woman.
Yeah, she's a woman all the way in the back.
Yeah, okay. As long as you're a woman, that's great.
Yeah. Oh, she's a woman too. It's true. It's true. But usually the people in the back always get ignored.
Okay,
so.
here, the back.
You, yeah, you.
There's about the effect of arousal on performance, and there's like this sort of bell curve. So there's a little bit of arousal is good. Like, so too little, you know, you're kind of apathetic and you're not motivated at all. That's not good. There's this sort of like ideal amount, which kind of motivates you and invigorates you. And then there's too much, which can be detrimental to your performance. And it's basically like amygdala activation, cortisol levels, that when they become too high, then you're not able to function. But a little bit is good. So I think with it, what? Yeah, you want to get to the sweet spot. Too much anxiety, maybe you should have a little drink beforehand. Not that I did that. But, you know, but then, you know, you don't want to be totally, you know, knocked out where, so there's this maximum level of arousal, and there's a whole theory behind that as well. If you what? Yeah, I think so. I think I think it helps. It's sort of a motivator, and I remember my mom always used to say when I used to be in plays as a kid, like, take that nervous energy and make it into excitement. And if you put it into your performance, you know, it actually, I think, enhances when you have just the right amount of, you want to be a little excited. You know, you see some performers, like I've seen comedians who are just so blasé about it, and you know, when they don't get excited anymore, I think that really it does affect their performance. You want to always get a little bit nervous, I think. Do you get nervous? A little?
Depends on if I'm doing something new or if I'm doing something memorized. I don't get nervous when I perform memorized stuff anymore. Yeah. But I do get nervous when I have to do something that I've just written and don't really know, or that I improvise.
The freestyle.
Freestyle,
yeah, that's scary.
For, yeah.
Yeah.
Because who knows what I'm going to say, really.
Yeah, that's the whole thing of it.
Yeah, we know about the flow state, that you're most likely to get into the flow state when the task that you're engaging in is just a little bit harder than where your skill level is at, right? So not exactly matched, you know, that can lead to boredom, but just a little bit challenging, so that you don't have to have that inner critic, you know, and you can just like engage in it. So I think that relates a little bit to, I think that can increase your chance of being in flow when you hit that sweet spot.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's all we have time for. Do you want
to? Is that all we have time for?
Well, unless we have, do you want to, maybe I think Baba's going to sing us out with one last.
Oh, yeah.
All right, I guess.
We can talk to you guys afterwards. Well.
Yeah, we'll talk afterwards.
We'll be right out front afterwards.
Yeah, cool.
Big round of applause for Scott Barry Kaufman and Heather Berlin.
Applause. Can you get my water?
Oh, yeah, you want to get that?
Scientifically themed raps about evolution and such, early drafts of my lyrics were really simplistic. They started out sounding a little bit like this. Yo, yo, the origin of species ain't no feces, dog, believe me. Word. That was all I could think of. So I was like, oh man, these lyrics really need to be rewritten. And sometimes people ask me, well, how did your show get written? Like this: performance, feedback, revision. And how do I generally develop my lyricism? Like this: performance, feedback, revision. And how do human beings ever learn to do anything? Like this: performance, feedback, revision. And evolution is really just kind of an algorithm that goes like this: performance, feedback, revision. So the genetic code of every living thing like you was also written like this: performance, feedback, revision. See, the genes are like a text with 100,000 pages, and the revisions occur in the little random changes that come from mutations. And then when they see the light, well, that's the performance. They call that the phenotype. And natural selection, well, that's the feedback side. That's about who survives and whose genes catch rise in the next generation. Yes, what I'm saying is that a rap performance like this is the best illustration for the way that Darwin's descent with modification works. Because the performance is necessary to change the words, to decide which have an impact and which to send back to the drawing board. In fact, I just did that when you guys failed to react. Because any line can change, and the mutations occur when I improvise on stage. Because up until this moment, everything I said was off the page. But now it's time for me to switch it up and do a freestyle section. I'll try to keep it really specific so I can beat your cheater detection. Alright, I'm stepping up with the freestyle. Ladies and gentlemen, I can admit it, this part of the rap has a lot more adrenaline. Yes indeed, see, I'm not trying to ever lose it or stall. It's probably because my bloodstream is extremely full of cortisol. I got the stress hormones, gripping microphones. Yeah, I'm standing on the stage right now. I'm all alone, where'd the scientists go? They can't explain what's happening in my brain in this exact second. But that's okay, cause now I can be hip-hop like trying to scratch records. Can't you see this right? I mean, I'm gonna have to drop this beat. I'm trying to mirror all you people, mirror neuronally. Yes indeed, I spit it right now and I go totally insane. I don't know if I've got a right or a left or even a split brain, but I might have to just step up and be bragging for you. Maybe I'll get some answers from Michael Gazanig. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I got it bouncing nice when I'm maybe spitting a couple of lyrics out of my mouth into the mic. Yeah, see, maybe you can learn a language if you're motivated massively. Kind of like Colin Firth did at the end of Love Actually. Can't you see? The hormones and the neurons can collaborate. Yeah, this is Baba Brinkman trying to spit it. This is how I meditate. I look internally. Sometimes it's introspection, but other times it's me trying to give you people an adrenaline injection. And even if I make a little mistake over the rhythm, that's okay. That's how I introduce randomness into the system. And evolution doesn't work without randomness. I'm burning like candles and the people listening can't handle this. Is improvised when I kick the rhymes. I'm trying to cast a spell on this lyric. I'm trying to hypnotize at the 92Y, trying to be a scientifically crude guy or maybe smooth guy. Yes, I might have to improve my mood by spitting a couple of lyrics and maybe checking out the eyes of the people who hear it. The eyes in this room are full of spectacles. I'm one of those rappers that really appeals to intellectuals. Yes indeed. See, my concept, my system like this: performance, feedback, revision. And anyone here can use the concept to learn how to do anything. So say it with me: performance, feedback, revision. That's evolution. Performance, feedback, revision. Memorize it. Performance, feedback, revision. Say it one more time. Performance, feedback, revision. You got it. Thank you. Thanks to the 92Y. Thanks to Heather and Scott. You guys have been fab. Have a great night. Thank you.